civil wars within parties are incredibly damaging because they signal to Canadians that we care more about ourselves than we do about them. That's why I made the difficult decision to remove Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott from the Liberal caucus.
The Prime Minister has kicked two former cabinet ministers out of the Liberal caucus tonight. Jody Wilson-Raybould also stripped of her nomination as a Liberal candidate in the next election. Good evening, everyone. I'm Carol McNeil. This is CBC News Network Tonight. We're tracking major developments in federal politics tonight. The Prime Minister has ejected former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould from the Liberal caucus. She can no longer run as a Liberal in the next election. Former Treasury Board President Jane Philpott is also gone. Late this afternoon, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made the announcement that he was expelling the two MPs from caucus, saying trust had been broken.
Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott are no longer members of the Liberal caucus. The trust that previously existed between these two individuals and our team has been broken. Whether it's taping conversations without consent or repeatedly expressing a lack of confidence in our government and in me personally as leader, it's become clear that Ms. Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott can no longer remain part of our Liberal team.
Jody Wilson-Raybould tweeted this about her removal from caucus. Reflecting on what PM has done, my thoughts are with my constituents in Vancouver, Granville, my dedicated staff and volunteers, my family and friends, and all Canadians who believed in a new way of doing politics. I will take the time to reflect and talk to my supporters about what happens next. What I can say is that I hold my head high and that I can look myself in the mirror knowing I did what I was required to do and what needed to be done based on principles and values that must always transcend party. I have no regrets. I spoke the truth, as I will continue to do. Jane Philpott held several key positions in Justin Trudeau's cabinet, most recently as president of the Treasury Board. She issued a statement tonight that reads, "Tonight, I was expelled from the caucus of the Liberal Party of Canada. Sadly, the decision was made without me being provided any opportunity to speak to National Caucus." Dr. Philpott goes on to say, that being said, it appears that the caucus is intent on staying the current course regardless of its short-term and long-term consequences to the party and to the country. And it has been decided that there is no place for me in the caucus. The two former cabinet ministers quit their posts, alleging the Prime Minister's office tried to pressure Wilson-Raybould on the prosecution of engineering giant SNC-Lavalin. Wilson-Raybould says that while she was Attorney General, the PMO inappropriately pushed for a second opinion on whether to go forward with a prosecution against the company or an out-of-court settlement, known as a deferred prosecution agreement. Although those revelations came out weeks ago, the decision to eject the two MPs came only tonight. So far, the opposition is wasting no time in criticizing the Prime Minister's decision to kick them out. Our Hannah Thibodeau is watching all of this reaction to the news tonight here in Toronto. Good evening, Hannah.
Hi, Carol.
Hannah, what pushed the Prime Minister to do this now?
In a nutshell, 54 days. Yes, 54 days of political drip, drip, drip of the SNC-Lavalin affair dominating the headlines. In fact, frustrating many of the Liberal caucus members. There was also a drop in the polling numbers for the Liberal Party right across the country because of this affair. And then finally, if you listen to the Prime Minister in his speech tonight, really the last straw was that secret recording that Jody Wilson-Raybould made of the clerk of the Privy Council, Michael Warnock, and released that recording to the Justice Committee. That was one of the big things that you started to see a lot of the Liberal caucus say, okay, there may have been a path back for Jody Wilson-Raybould into the Liberal fold, but that really was the straw that broke the camel's back for many in the caucus. But not only that, he said in his speech tonight that he felt that the two women didn't have full confidence in the party, in the government, and in particular, didn't have full confidence in the Prime Minister himself. And that's something that, we have been asking the two women, and they haven't been able to say that about the Prime Minister. So those are the reasons why. But I want to give you how it unfolded just a little bit. We're getting more information, Carol, from our contacts in Ottawa. The Ottawa Bureau has been running around gathering information all day. So originally we thought that the caucus all together would vote and decide whether they would eject these two women from the Liberal caucus. However, in the end, it was the Prime Minister who kind of made the decision. There wasn't that vote of all of the MPs. He sat down with the regional caucus chairs earlier and got their opinion of what was happening. Now, here's a little bit of new information, just some color from behind the scenes from our David Cochrane. He says that the Prime Minister met with Jody Wilson-Raybould and Philpott individually after being briefed by those regional caucus executives. So there are 9 of them, and he described to them what the will of the caucus was, and that is essentially what guided the Prime Minister's decision.
What's the opposition's reaction been?
The opposition are fuming about this. Andrew Scheer came out on Twitter quite a way. He says that this really sent the message that if you tell the truth within the Liberal caucus and the Liberal Party, then you get booted from it if they are unhappy with you. And also, we heard from the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh. He says that the two women are getting kicked out of the Liberal fold because they're speaking truth to power. And I was listening to the press conferences that happened afterwards with many of the opposition MPs, and we heard from Alexandra Boulay-Rees, who is the deputy leader of the NDP, and he was asked whether he would welcome Jody Wilson-Raybould into the NDP fold. What he says that he would welcome anyone with progressive views, and went on to say that there would probably be some phone calls going on. But right now, I think they're letting the two women kind of, have what happened tonight sink in. But it was interesting that they didn't rule that out.
All right, Hannah, thank you so much.
Quite welcome.
Hannah Thibodeau reporting here in Toronto tonight. Good to see you here, Hannah.
Thanks for having me.
For more reaction to the story, we've reached someone very close to Jody Wilson-Raybould, who has been open with his opinion on this prior. Joining me now by phone is BC Hereditary Chief Bill Wilson. He is also the father of Jody Wilson-Raybould. Good evening to you, sir.
Good evening.
Mr. Wilson, what's your reaction to the Prime Minister ejecting Jody Wilson-Raybould from Liberal caucus?
Well, it's no surprise to me. I don't think that there was a choice, but it seems to me similar to the captain of the Titanic throwing overboard the only 2 navigators on the ship.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, those 2 women clearly represented good government, good relationships, and truth and honesty, and he threw them both overboard. And I'm afraid that what it looks like is now we've got a choice between Huey, Dewey, and Louie, and we'll end up back in a Conservative government. And we know, as Aboriginal people in particular, that the Conservative government had draconian racist measures against our people. And the chance that there was some kind of change, some kind of new progress, some kind of new way to govern as the Prime Minister stumbles through it is clearly gone. Reconciliation is now out the window. Any kind of assumption of a feminist Prime Minister is a sham.
Okay, when you say he had no choice, did I hear that correctly? He probably had no choice but to eject them from caucus?
Well, the hole he dug himself into provided him with no choice. When this initially happened, he said, come out straightforward to the Canadian public and to everybody and said, yes, these things took place, but we prevented them. And listened to Jody and listened to Miss Philpott. But he didn't do that. He told one lie, then he told another lie. I counted 7 lies that he told in trying to cover this mess up. And then now he's got himself so deeply in the hole that I don't think he did have a choice but to let them go. Unless he grew up and said, yes, I've made a clear mistake. 2 of my people have resigned, and I intend to change things, and I intend to make absolutely sure that Jody Wilson-Raybould and Dr. Philpott rejoin the party with good standing, on the conditions that we all get together and agree. That would have been a man's way of doing things, but I'm afraid this young fella seems to be afraid of strong women.
By releasing the tape, Jody Wilson-Raybould, for some people that was the last straw, that they would no longer support her because she taped Michael Wernick without his knowledge. What do you think?
Yes, I think that's true. The reality is, though, that Jody committed an offense in making the tape in order to try to protect herself and the Prime Minister from a larger mistake of, breach of public trust and the rule of law. I don't recommend that people record other people's conversations or anything like that, but I certainly would praise anybody that would try to protect themselves knowing that something is going to happen, as she obviously did in December, that somebody could be breaking the rule of law. And she warned the Prime Minister 5 or 6 times, and he didn't listen.
Okay, what's she going to do now? Do you know?
I'm not entirely sure. She probably will take some time with her people in her riding and in her area. I would certainly hope that she would run again. I'm not sure that she could possibly run as a Liberal without the Prime.
Yeah,
certainly run again.
She's not allowed to run.
She would double her majority of last time, which was 9,000 votes.
She's not allowed to run again as a Liberal. Can you see her going to any other party?
I certainly hope not. Like I say, you pick between Huey, Dewey, and Louie which one you like the best, because none of the political parties, as far as I'm concerned, represent any kind of possibility for Aboriginal people. But I would certainly hope that she would run as an independent and get re-elected, and one never knows. The machinations of federal politics could certainly change the picture.
Okay. Do you think she did the right thing in all of this, even though it meant that she will not have a powerful seat at cabinet?
I clearly think she did the right thing. She was born and given the name of integrity, an honest woman of high birth by my mother, and she's acquitted herself extremely well in that regard. And if people will be, minor criticism, not that it's a minor offense, standing up to the Prime Minister and to Butts and to Wernick and trying to keep the rule of law in place, to me, is outstanding. And it's being supported by one of the most other outstanding women in the cabinet, in Jane Philpott.
All right. Bill Wilson, a First Nations leader and father of Jody Wilson-Raybould, thank you for joining us tonight.
You're welcome.
When people behave in a way that means that others can't trust them, that it is about us knowing that if anybody taped a conversation with the senior public servant without telling them, that they would no longer be trusted. I think that as the Indigenous community, or particularly First Nations, there is a sense of loss of someone at the cabinet table. But we will continue to make sure those people know they've been heard at the cabinet table.
I think here it's a caucus decision. It comes back to that, and caucus is saying that there's a breakdown of trust here, and once you have a breakdown of trust, it makes it very difficult. And when you think of the reporting in the first instance of that conversation, for me, as someone who practiced law, I find it shocking and troubling that someone's going to report a conversation of a client and then use that against the client. So for me, I think that the Prime Minister here has shown great leadership, listened to caucus, and then now has made his decision. In the end, I just thank Jody Wilson-Raybould and Jane Philpott for their contributions. But as we move forward now, with this breakdown in trust, we have to move on. We have to get back to focusing now on what we need to do for Canadians, and we want to continue to build on the great work.
I think it was a very difficult decision to make. We've tried for weeks to have the right conversations inside our caucus with my 2 former colleagues, but obviously the trust had been broken. Is it here or in the event? And it's an inevitable solution. Reality is we didn't have any clue about that tape. We didn't know about it. This was a total surprise, and this is extremely damageable because we know that obviously Canadians don't think it's right to record people without them knowing.
That trust has been broken by two members. It's not a, you know, it's kind of a sad night, but it is something we had to do.
Let's assess the decision in and of itself to remove these two individuals from caucus. And joining me to help me do that is Jamie Watt. He's the executive chairman of Navigator Limited and an expert, of course, in crisis communications. Hi, Jamie. Great to see you again.
Hey, good to see you, Vashi.
Really appreciate it. So let me get your initial reaction to this decision.
Well, I think my initial reaction is that it's had the same result as it would have been made, as though it had been made a while ago, although a lot more damage to the government and to its program. I think it was inevitable that it was going to come to this. Politics is a team sport, certainly a team sport in the federal level and at the provincial level. And when you're not a team player, it's pretty hard to stay in the locker room.
Do you think that what really changed between when these allegations were first made and today is that tape recording came out on Friday? Do you think that provided, I don't want to say cover, but the reason for the justification for the Prime Minister to make this move?
I think the straw that broke the camel's back is a cliche for a reason, and that's because it's true. I'm not sure that in and of itself was enough, but it certainly piled on top of everything else became too much. I mean, how could you make that tape recording? How could you release that tape recording and then sit next to your caucus mates and say, we're all one team, we're going to go through the firewall together and try and beat the Conservatives and the New Democrats in the next election? It just became a completely untenable position.
Maybe because, I don't want to speak for anybody, but the idea of doing politics differently, right? The constant insistence from the Prime Minister, even over the past 3 weeks when all of this was broiling, that it's a big tent that everyone can be allowed in. Do you think, though, that it was as soon as that tape was released, it was kind of a foregone conclusion?
Well, you know, there's a funny thing about politics, and I've known this since when my hair was a different color, and that is people always talk about doing things new and differently. That is until it involves being different or new. And that's when the trouble always starts. You know, it's a great idea to say we're going to try and do things in a new and different way. It's much more difficult to do them. And I think the problem with this one was that it really went to some of the things that keep a political party, keep a team together, and that is cohesion. That is having each other's back. That's that sense of being in it together. I think when you lose that, and some of the caucus members that you interviewed as they were leaving, although they didn't say very much, I noticed that famous caucus discipline is back at work. But to the extent they did say something, they basically said, you know, if you can't be one of the team, you can't be one of the team.
Do you think it's too late has too much damage been done?
In terms of,
I guess, the impact on their brand, in terms of the damage that it's done to the Prime Minister. We've seen the polls, for example.
Sure.
Like, does this, the indication the Prime Minister seemed to want to give was that, let's move on. Does this actually do that?
Well, I think that remains to be seen. I actually don't think that these things are as determinative on election day as some other people do. There's no question some people will be let down because they thought the Prime Minister was going to do things differently. To date, doesn't seem as though he is. But between now and election day, there's a lot of things that are affecting Canadians in terms of their everyday life, their ability to provide for their families, to have a good job, to have a clean environment, to have a safe country in which to live. There's lots and lots of other reasons why people will make their decision on election day. Will this help? Of course it won't help. But will it be determinative? I think anybody who thinks a couple hundred days before the election will be determinative, it's way, way, way too early to tell.
Let me ask you a bit about the opposition and how this plays out for them. I just want to read, we just got our hands on a release from Andrew Scheer, who's reacting to this. He says, today Liberal MPs have let Canadians know where they stand. They have chosen to condemn colleagues who spoke truth to power and to prop up a Prime Minister who is drowning in scandal. The message they have sent today is clear. If you tell the truth, there is no room for you in the Liberal Party of Canada. For Ms. Wilson-Raybould, it is the second time, the statement goes on to say, she has been fired for standing up for the rule of law, the first time by Justin Trudeau, the second time by her own colleagues. This should tell Canadians everything they need to know about how things work in the Liberal Party. They look the other way on corruption and punish those who won't do the same. How do you anticipate, I guess, or what words of advice would you have for both the government and the opposition in how they proceed forth on this?
Yeah, I think the opposition is in a bit of a tough space because I'm not sure that faced with the same circumstance, Mr. Scheer wouldn't have made the same decision. I'm not so sure that if he had people in his caucus who said they had no confidence in him, no confidence in his leadership, were secretly taping one another and causing those kinds of problems, that he'd have patience to keep him there. On the other hand, I have sympathy for his position that he's got to try as best he can to advance his political interests. So he's going to, go and pound away at the statement that he's issued. I'm not really sure what options he had today, but I question how effective that will be over the long term. What the government needs to do, and what I've been saying the government needs to do since this darn thing started, is put a stake in the heart, put it to bed and move on, because every day that they don't move on, they're not getting their message out. Can anyone remember one bloody thing about that budget? No, because it's been swamped by this scandal. And that's the biggest thing that these guys have got to deal with. And that's why I think they should have made this decision a long, long time ago. Maybe today this will allow them to turn that page and get on with things.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. How do they just sort of move on? Is this it? Because it certainly doesn't sound from that statement like the opposition is going to let this go. There is still the possibility that the current Attorney General, David Lametti, who we heard from just moments ago, could decide to intervene and overrule essentially the DPP's decision. How do they get past it?
So there's two things that have to happen in order for them to get past it. No more oxygen, right? We got to make sure no more shoes drop, whatever, overworked expression you want to use. We got to make sure that's it. That's the most important thing, because if this keeps going and there keeps oxygen for this thing, that's the problem for the government. Eventually the public will get tired of it. They'll say to the opposition, you've made your point. We understand the point that you object to. We got it. Let's move on to something else. The second thing, and this is the part, Vashi, which will actually translate to problem at the ballot box in October, is if there's any more. Sometimes these things are like mice. You see one mouse and there's a whole bunch more mice lurking around. And if there are other incidences like this, if there's other examples of behavior within the Prime Minister's office like this, if there's other kinds of times when there's been interactions with cabinet ministers or people have felt abused or pushed or bullied, and we start to see a pattern. If Canadians see a pattern, then there's trouble. And that pattern will translate to the ballot box, will be much more of a problem than one isolated incident.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Jamie. Jamie Watt, Executive Chairman of Navigator Limited. Appreciate your time and insight as always.
Thanks for having me.